Hello, and welcome to Keep It Moving Wheelchair Repair and Maintenance. In this episode, we're going to be covering the most common maintenance repair other than lubing that you'll probably have to do on your chair, and that is replacing your caster bearings. Now, the caster fork is up front, and these will be attached to it like so. You'll either have to take this off with Phillips screws on both sides, hex screws on both sides, so Allen wrenches, or sometimes even nuts on both sides. Usually, if you have a tool, you'll probably need doubles because as you spin one side, the other side will probably spin as well, so you need to hold one steady. So a screwdriver on both sides or an Allen wrench on both sides. Now, before you take it off, one thing that I recommend is to tape the side of the fork that has the longer spacer. So that way you can go ahead and do that when you come back. You might want to tape the side of the wheel as well, because one thing that I've noticed is some of these wheels, such as on the Tie-Lite Aero Z, they'll actually have a thicker wheel with a much deeper dish on one side. I think that's because they also sell this with only a one-arm fork instead of two arms. And you'll need to make sure that you have the right part of the wheel with the longer spacer into the right side of the fork. So just be careful on that. A future video will actually be covering how to replace the bearings that go into the caster fork themselves. So right there on both sides. And we'll be covering that in a future video. So if you'd like to see that, make sure to like and subscribe to Keep It Moving Wheelchair Repair and Maintenance. Now, to get started with this, there's a couple of different ways we can do this, and we'll actually be demonstrating it on two caster wheels. This wheel's from a power chair, the Jazzy or the Quantum, and then this is a regular wheel from most manual wheelchairs using the smaller wheels with the smaller axles. When you get these caster wheels, sometimes they'll have a bearing that's got approximately a 3/8 diameter inner race of the bearing, and then some have 8mm. This one right here is an 8mm. So this tool is what's called a blind bearing remover. This is actually from a company called wheelchairbearings.com. They also have a site called Disability Labs. So here is the 3/8, and then this one right here is the 8mm. These will probably be pretty dirty because they get messed up in around 3 months to 6 months based on how much salt, water, everything you have out where you live. So if you do live in an area with more mud, salt, these are going to get rusted because they're actually below that water line. Most puddles would actually come up above this caster. So this could be really dirty and really rusted. If you use these are a little tougher because you have to really clean this inner race. You have the outer race, which is the outer part here, and the inner race on the inside of the bearing. This goes into this inner race, and then you take an adjustable spanner or adjustable wrench and then another small wrench, and you have to torque this down. This one, the 8mm uses a 3/8 inch wrench, and you get this super tight. Now the challenge with this one is actually really easy to tighten this down so much that it does break this screw. So I'll show you a different way to remove it using this power chair one. So now you just set that like that, and you grab a hole punch, and you tap, and boom, just like that, it popped the bearing out. And you'd go ahead, tighten it down. Full disclosure, I actually have essential trimmer, so my hands shake a little bit. And then you'd loosen this. Sometimes that'll pop out, but sometimes it's in there tight enough that you'll then put it in this little hole. And this is actually a stand from wheelchairbearings.com. And then this is a 3/4 inch hole. Then that allows you to grab a punch, place it right there, and knock this out to do it on the other side. Now here's the spacer that was on the other side of the bearing. That keeps these from going in too far. Sometimes they'll also have a ledge, you can see it in there, a ledge that'll stop the bearings. Most of the time it'll have that. Okay, now we'll do it on the other side. We'll put this in. Sometimes you have to gently tap that in because it's still a little tighter. All right. Now we'll tighten this down again. We'll use this right here. Get that nice and tight. Take this off. Put it here again. Now you'll be able to see this actually a little bit easier. Then I put that right there. And boom. So now I have both bearings out. Okay. I'll set this to the side. I'll set this over here for a second. Tighten that down. Loosen that up. Keep that nice and loose. Place it here again. Using these are non-destructive to the bearings because it's wedged in there on that inner race. So that when it pulls it out, it's not damaging the bearing. Now, one thing that a lot of people like to do on larger bearings is take some sort of pick, pull this up, and then clean out the old bearings that are probably dried out, and then pack it again with grease, about a quarter to a third. You don't want to put too much grease in there, it won't spin properly. Now, I don't do that because I have yet to find any sort of pick that I can actually pry off the seal without damaging the seal and causing the bearing to leak over time. So I usually replace these bearings. Now that's how you'd remove it using one of these. I'm going to set this to the side because we're going to come back to that. For this next one, I'm going to use this homemade version of the stand. This is actually what I used way back in the day. And I like this because this one has larger holes that just make it easier for me to do certain things. This is actually a 1 3/8 hole. This is a 1 3/8 hole with a 3/4 inch hole. This is the 3/4 inch, very similar to on here. And then this one is a 2-inch hole that I use many times with the casters. I'll go ahead and use that 2-inch hole. So with this, I'm going to reach down, move that spacer out of the way, and then I'll come in at an angle and be able to place this punch on the inner race. And I'll tap gently, move it to the back, tap again, move it to the left, tap, move it to the right, tap, and then just work my way around slowly. And it fell out. There's the spacer, there's the bearings. I'll do it again. Now you can see it here, right there. I'll come in and grab this, tap, 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 and in 3 taps it came out. And I've actually filmed this from the sides before, and that comes out, if you do that, that comes out very even, so you don't have to worry about it binding or anything. One thing about using that, I wouldn't use a screwdriver, because sometimes you have ridges in here or different pieces that you'd worry about damaging with a screwdriver. So I use these punch pins. These are actually a set of 5 from Harbor Freight for $10. They're by Pittsburgh. There's also Amazon versions. They look identical. I probably wouldn't get the ones with rubber on the tips because then it would be a little harder to angle in there, but you could try those as well. But 5 punch pins of different sizes for only $10 at the time of filming. All right, now that I have these done, we're going to go ahead and replace the bearings. Now from wheelchairbearing.com, these actually come in a kit. For 3/8, these tend to be R6 bearings. These 8mm, these are 608 bearings. So this is a bearing press with bearing drifts. These are called drifts. This is a bearing press. And then these are blind bearing removers. Now another place that you can get this, in case you can't order in America from wheelchairbearings.com or Disability Labs, is something like this. This is at time of filming, a $45 bike set of bearing drifts and a press. Here's the press here, and then here are the drifts. So a 12x28 is also one that they sell. This would be for rear rim bearings or the casters. Matter of fact, some of them, instead of having 1/2 inch, they do actually have 12 millimeter. Quickie actually uses that on their caster bearings. And if you look to the side, you have the R6, and then right here in the middle are the 8 mils. Very similar. If you have a kit like this, you will have to build the smaller press, but you would have the larger press for doing the rims. When I do show you the video on doing the caster wheels, I will actually use the one that's from wheelchairbearing.com. I like how their larger press works. But let me go ahead and close that. This is a good way of doing it. $45, you have one that can work on your caster bearings, your rear rims, and 2 different types of front caster bearings. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put the bearings back in. So if these were brand new, which these actually are, you just go ahead and grease them and put them in. I put a little tiny bit of grease. You don't want them spinning in there in the outer race. But if you just use a little bit of grease, many of these caster rims, I know these 2 are plastic, many of them are aluminum. And whenever you mix metals, you do have to worry about having issues between the 2 metals over time. So I would just recommend putting a tiny bit of grease on here. Not too much. I'd also recommend wearing plastic gloves because you will get some grease on your hands. I'll set that over there, and then I'll put it here. And then what you would do is, if you use this as is, you take this off one side and then pass this through, then do the other side and put it in like that. And then you would take 2 1/2-inch wrenches, because these nuts on both of those are 1/2 inch, and then you just tighten them like that. One recommendation I would have is, if you're in the US, you can get these 5/16 Thru knobs. They will actually go right on there. That is a 5/16. And the thread does match on these Thru knobs, by the way. If you are in a different country, you may want to use, I believe it's M8. You could get some M8 threaded rod and some M8 Thru knobs, and use that bicycle kit and go ahead and build a press like this of your own. I'm going to take these 2 bearing drifts off. I'll put that one there, and take this and pass it through. All right. Then set that right there. Take this one. I'll put some grease on this, just a little tiny bit here. Okay. Now before you set this one in, you want to put this little spacer in there. Then tap that in, or place that in. Make sure that it's sitting there nice and flush. The nice thing is this threaded rod is approximately the size of the inner race. Then these sit on there nice and tight, so there's very little play. Then you spin this on. And if somebody with essential tremors can do this, I'm sure many of you can do it as well. Now once it starts getting nice and tight, then you start turning this. So I'll move this into camera a little bit more, and I'll gently start twisting these, only hand tight. You don't have to do anything hard. You don't have to give it too much force. And as you see, those bearings are starting to go in as I just gently turn this. This side's already in. This side's starting to go in more. So I'll just turn this side, leave this side where it's at. Then once you feel it stop, don't over tighten it. You'll unscrew this. Take this off. And there you go. You now have a completely like new caster bearing set in there, so that you can place this back on your fork and get this going. That did not take that long at all. Now with this one, same process. This is for that power chair, the Jazzy or the Quantum. These are already greased. I did those before with a different live demonstration I did. So I'll place that in. Now the thing about these on this power chair, they have this inner race that sticks out a little ways. You might be able to see that. The great thing about this is that will actually press on that inner race piece and push it in. So I'll put this back on here. I'll get that nice and even. I'll drop this through, just like that. I'll set that on there. I'll take this spacer. I'll actually place that here. Then I'll take the next bearing right here. Place that in its socket. All right, so now we have that in there, nice and even. I'll grab my other bearing drift right here. Thing about this one is since this wheel is thicker, I will have to unscrew this side of it to have some more room. There we are. Then I'll grab my other knob, place it on here, thread that on nice and easy. Boom. Now this one doesn't go completely flush because that inner race is raised. But there you are. Now with these that have the little spacer in it, the spacer's not the exact length. Sometimes you have to wiggle it a little bit. And then when you have your axle, you'll need to just make sure that you jostle this a bit to get the spacer where it needs to be to get the axle through. A lot of those are actually like that. Okay. So thank you very much for joining us today. We used a rubber and plastic hammer. We used a little bit of grease. This is marine grease. If you don't use the 5/16 through knobs, then you will need a 1/2-inch wrench and an adjustable wrench to be able to tighten the bearing press to put these on. If you use the blind bearing remover, you will need an adjustable wrench and the right sized smaller wrench. The 8mm takes a 3/8, and I believe the 3/8 one actually takes a 7/16 if I remember correctly. Yep, 7/16. And then those you'll be able to tighten them and then tap them out through the side. You also need either the bearing stand or a piece of wood with a 1 3/8 and 3/4 inch hole. You also need punch pins, really inexpensive. Allen keys, hex keys if you need them, or a screwdriver to get the axle off your caster fork. So not a lot of tools. Matter of fact, I'll put the prices in the description. With very few tools, you can start doing your casters at home in a matter of minutes. Thank you very much. Like and subscribe to Keep It Moving Wheelchair Repair and Maintenance for more videos just like this.